My name is Ami Chen Mills, and this evening I am hosting a special Talk of the Bay program produced by the team at Moment of Truth. Our show tonight is called Palestinian and Muslim Voices on Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. From the ceasefire resolution failures at the city and county levels in Santa Cruz to the framing of what happened there, to the tremendous levels of death and destruction in the Gaza Strip and during October 7th, our Santa Cruz community has responded with charges of divisiveness and violence, quote unquote, to the frustrations and outrage and despair of the Palestinian and Muslim communities and their supporters, many of whom are actually Jewish supporters. An opinion piece published in our local Lookout online news platform addressed the ceasefire meeting and the anger expressed there as something that would have, quote, shamed Martin Luther King Jr. Calls were made to engage in community dialogues to heal our own wounds. But what about the ongoing devastation and human death toll of this war? The charges of genocide by Israel in Gaza by the global community. How can anyone heal with this level of violence and deprivation ongoing? For myself, I realized quickly after October 7th that the dialogue in the United States, and especially for young people, had shifted dramatically around Israel and Palestine. Both Jews and Palestinians and Muslims live here and across the United States. Their voices have been rising, of course, and seem essential to listen to, especially now. In my view, everything rests on our listening to one another. Our guests today are Sophia Azeb. Her pronouns are she, they. Sophie is an assistant professor of Black Studies in the Department of Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Sophia's current book project, Another Country, Translational Blackness and the Afro-Arab, explores the currents of transnational and translational blackness charted by African-American, Afro-Caribbean, African, and Afro-Arab peoples across 20th century North Africa and Europe. Prior to joining the faculty at UC Santa Cruz, Sophia was a member of the faculty collective that founded the Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity at the University of Chicago. Sophia is a frequent contributor to the Funambulist platform. We also have with us Ali Mohammed, who is an Egyptian gastroenterologist practicing in Santa Cruz, affiliated with Sutter Health and the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. Dr. Mohammed has written several opinion pieces in the Santa Cruz Sentinel on Islamophobia and the history of anti-Muslim sentiments in the U.S. Suhail Kawasme, a board member at the Center for Islamic Studies here in Santa Cruz, father of 3 and grandfather of 6, is joining us today. So welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you were able to join us in the studio today. And I guess I wanted to start with a little bit of your backgrounds and why you're invested in what's happening in Israel, Gaza, Palestine. And so, Sophia, let's start with you. You are Palestinian.
Yes, thank you for having me, Amy. Yes, I'm Palestinian American. I am one of almost 80 grandchildren of my grandparents who left Bir Nabala, their village in what is known as the West Bank. And obviously I'm strongly invested in what is occurring right now, the devastation that is being wrought upon Palestinians in Gaza, due to my personal connection, but also due to my political and intellectual commitments. I'm a scholar of Black Studies, which means I study systems of power. I think about racialization, colonization, comparative histories of imperialism and systemic violence, and Palestine is central to this global dynamic, particularly in the 20th century.
Okay, thank you. And Suhail, you are Palestinian. You've lived in the United States for some time, I understand?
Yes, I was born in the city of Hebron in the West Bank. And I came to the United States as a young man. I was 21 years old to go to school, and I am a grandpa right now.
Yeah.
So it's been here like 47 years.
Yeah. And you worked in aerospace?
Yes, I did. I studied at Northrop University, and I did work at Northrop Grumman for 15 years. Then I worked with Lockheed Martin for another 15 years.
Well, at the facility up here in
No,
Bonny Doon?
it's I worked in the skunk work in Palmdale, California.
Okay.
Those F-35s they are talking about, I built the first 3 of them with my hands.
Wow.
The one that are being used right now
In the war.
in the war to kill my people.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be pretty intense for you. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I thought I built those airplanes to defend the United States of America, not to commit a war like that against my people.
Yeah. And Dr. Muhammad, you have written these editorials. You've been very brave and outspoken in our community about saying what you think about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. And you are Egyptian. And why do you feel this passion at this time?
Thank you for having me. You know, I'm actually American. My family background, my ethnic background is Egyptian, but I was born and have lived in the United States my entire life. You know, I do come from a different background, and having experienced so many instances of discrimination, of really racism against the Muslim community growing up, having seen the U.S. foreign policy, the way that it's structured and disadvantages people of color around the world, you know, having these perspectives, really staying silent is not an option for me. You know, this is a matter that really touches the very fiber of my being, speaking out for oppressed peoples across the world. And, you know, in my opinion, the issue of the Palestinians is one of the most clear-cut issues in all of the world, in all of the conflicts and the issues of the world. There is, in my opinion, very few issues that are so clear-cut with regards to oppression, discrimination, dispossession of peoples for no reason other than who they are.
We'll start with the local, and then we'll go to more of the global issues around what's going on. But I was telling you guys when we were waiting to come into the studio that the last person I had on my show for a full hour on this issue was a Palestinian doctor, Izzeldin Abuleish, who was the author of a book. Daughters were killed in Gaza in 2014, and then he's lost 22 family members now in Gaza. He's now in Canada. He fled Gaza eventually. And so I was going to have Jewish people on the show to talk about these dialogues that they're having together around Zionism. And I got a text from a member of the Palestine Solidarity Committee Central Coast who was concerned that we make sure to center Jewish people who are allied with the Palestinian cause and also Palestinians. I mean, that was my thought as well. Let's just go to Palestinians because there's so much impact, right? And so I guess you heard me talk about the ceasefire meetings, and I remember just the way that the letters to the editor came out and the opinion pieces about how it was so disrespectful to speak to the council that way. And I understand that the council was probably frightened, you know, by people yelling at them. But I also was watching, you know, these bombings happening in Gaza, and you know, I could understand people. I believe people here have, some people, Palestinian people, have family members still in Gaza, from what I've heard. And so, what do you think about the voice of Palestinians in this community and whether it's been integrated enough into our dialogue? Sophia.
I was at the second of those meetings with the Santa Cruz City Council. And one thing that really struck me while I was there for almost the entire, God, how long was it? 10 hours or so, was that the vast majority of Jewish speakers were pro-ceasefire resolution. And that, of course, is because, you know, Santa Cruz is a place that has a rich political history, a rich history of political organizing and resistance to oppression. And you saw that very clearly in that meeting. But, you know, I also observed an alarming amount of incredibly racialized rhetoric that repeated Islamophobic, racist claims that many of which have been debunked since October 7th, but many of which predate October 7th and reminded me quite a lot, actually, of being in the U.S. right after 9/11, the sort of just immediate reactionary attitudes. And yes, people were quite upset when, after hours and hours of testimony, vastly in support of the ceasefire resolution, the city council, with very little fanfare, I think within 5 minutes, adopted a resolution that said nothing, something about peace in the Middle East, which is, of course, meaningless. We all want peace everywhere, right? And people were rightfully, I think, upset that they had invested so much time and energy and really came with their vulnerability, whether or not they were Palestinian, to express their solidarity with the Palestinian people and to demonstrate that our community has its own priorities. Our tax dollars should not be going to supporting a genocide in Gaza or anywhere else.
Do you think it's meaningful? That was one of the critiques was, what's this going to do? The city council should not be weighing in on this.
I mean, I'll be quite frank. I'm not a huge fan of electoral politics generally. But even with that, I can see the value of people feeling that they have some democratic power in their own community. And this isn't really a distanced matter for us in Santa Cruz. Yes, we're 7,000 miles away, but our tax dollars directly go to this genocide. It is not distant for us. And if you walk around Santa Cruz every day, we see the problems that are very real in our community of houselessness, of students at my university living in their cars, people not being able to live here that work here. I mean, we could redirect these funds in productive ways. And that's why I think local communities are so invested in their cities taking a strong stance. It is largely symbolic. It's obviously not going to change. But our city councils and local leaders are our main voice to our state representatives, regional representatives, and so on and so forth. So there is a logic there that means something like a resolution in Santa Cruz makes a real difference in the long run.
If you've just tuned in, you are listening to K-Squid 90.7, 89.5 and 89.7 FM in Santa Cruz and throughout the Monterey Bay. Our show today on Talk of the Bay is Palestinian and Muslim Voices on Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. We have 3 people who are either Muslim or Palestinian in the studio with us, and we're talking about the recent hullabaloo over the conflict ceasefire resolutions that were proposed at the county level. They didn't get a lot of attention, but the city got a lot of attention because there were so many people who showed up. Dr. Mohammed, you had some comments when we were talking outside about democracy and how you think people feel, how the voters feel. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me say that I think that this is just an enormous shame on the city council and a stain on Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County that this crime of crimes, a genocide, the dehumanization of people, the targeting and killing of children, that they could not even speak one word directed with justice towards that. And if this was happening to other populations, if this was happening to a white population or a Jewish population, this Holocaust of Palestinians, you would not see any hesitation from the city council. So it's very, to me, racist and dehumanizing of Palestinians, of Arabs, of Muslims in general. I think that it's really a misrepresentation of the will of the people. There's so many people across the United States. The majority of Democratic voters would like a ceasefire, and that is just the bare minimum, asking for a ceasefire to stop this carnage that is just completely, indiscriminate. The targeting of babies. It's just completely heartless and evil. And to not be able to meet that minimum threshold is really a misrepresentation of the will of the voters.
And Suhail, I talked to you earlier about this too before the show, and you were saying this is not important, a ceasefire. Tell me how you feel about the process here. If you think that you have any comments about that, or if you want to say something else.
I was there at the hearing. I couldn't make it inside because the line was way outside around the building, and I was there till maybe 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't see any problem. But what I saw is, I would say 85 to 90% of the people standing out there are supporting of a ceasefire. And if our elected officials are supposed to come to the will of the people, then they should have voted for a ceasefire, because everybody was taking that. And they were against a lady, I think, having a dummy dressed in a white cloth with the blood on it, that it bothered them. Wouldn't 13,000 babies bother you or killed? Ceasefire is beyond us. Now it's behind us. Ceasefire should have taken place long time ago. We are in the 7th month of the genocide, and nobody is stopping it. I am looking for somebody to stop it. We don't want just a ceasefire. Stop the genocide. Stop supporting Israel with all the weapons that we have. Stop our tax money going there. That's where Israel gonna listen to us. It's not just say, hey, Netanyahu, please stop. Netanyahu does not want to stop this, because if he stops the war, he knows he is going to lose his government. So he will do whatever it takes, hit Iran, hit anybody else, just to stay in power. And it's really for the Israelis and the Palestinians. We need to stop this. People dying on both sides. And aren't we human beings? We feel for each other. We see that enough is enough.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for. Hopefully we will stop this genocide right away, and we can then go on the next steps, which exchange prisoners and talk about lifting the siege on Gaza. The siege on Gaza has been 17 years. You are putting over 2 million people in an open jail. And they say this is the only democracy in the Middle East. What democracy is Israel about when you put 2 million Palestinians in a jail? And now it's not only a jail. You cut the water. Even if they couldn't cut the air, they will. Cut the food, destroy. Out of 52 hospitals, I think only 3 hospitals are functioning halfway in Gaza Strip. People are dying from hunger. And I am not saying that. That's the Secretary of Defense of Israel. At first he said, we're going to cut the water, we're going to cut the food, we're going to kill everybody. And those Palestinians are animals. I am not an animal. I'm a human being. And I am here, and I'm not going nowhere. And the Palestinian people in Gaza are not going nowhere.
I want to just direct our listeners to an excellent article that ran in the New Yorker, January 22nd, 2024, about Benjamin Netanyahu. And I'm going to read something because it just shows me how little, I mean, of course, Israelis would say, well, this happened and that happened, and there were suicide bombers and this and that, and this is why. I want to share I think this is an important little piece to read from this article in the New Yorker, January 22nd of this year. What is not especially visible on Israeli television is the unrelenting horror of Palestinian suffering in Gaza, where more than 23,000, this is in January, we're above 30,000 now, maybe 32,000, 34,000, have been killed in 3 months. Is that right? Was it 3 months by then? And an estimated 1.9 million have been displaced. Only rarely do Israelis see what the rest of the world sees: the corpses of Palestinian children wrapped in sheets by a mass grave, widespread hunger and disease, schools and houses, apartment blocks and mosques reduced to rubble, people fleeing from one place to the next on foot, on donkey carts, 3 to a bicycle. And then it just goes on with everything that's been happening. And it says here also, unfortunately, a disregard for the suffering in Gaza is hardly limited to reactionary ministers or far-right commentators. I think that there's this sense in Israeli society of just, and it's in this article too, of being kind of stuck in October 7th, in the hostages and this and that. And these were horrible things that happened on October 7th. How can we get past this logjam of hatred and revenge, it feels like, because I mean, a lot of Israelis, I think, and Jewish people say, well, oh, they're not trying to kill civilians. But, I've heard on the news that there are these helicopter drones that have little guns on them that have targeted children and toddlers and babies, actually. Like, there's a sense that, go ahead.
Actually make the noises of crying children to coax people out of their homes at nights. So they program these sounds of crying children in these drones. And the sound of drones is inescapable in Gaza long before October 7th. People of Gaza are constantly under surveillance day in and day out. So, in fact, the Israeli state was primed to take such elaborate and extensive action against the population of Gaza because it controls every single aspect of Gazan society, including the registry of Palestinians who live in Gaza.
Dr. Mohammed.
Yeah, I'd like to first say that, Suhail said that it's an open-air prison. It's actually a concentration camp. Gaza is really a concentration camp. They're blocked from air, sea, their airport's been bombed. They can go nowhere. To be raised in this concentration camp without any access to the outside world and to have no hopes, no dreams, and to be bombed every few years and what the Israelis call mowing the lawn is really just, framing that. It needs to be framed correctly. The context needs to be there. And it's not. And to your point of that 30,000 people have died, Ralph Nader said something profound. He said, I think it was about a month ago, he published an article, his estimation, at least 200,000 Palestinians have died, if you take into consideration. And I think the numbers are going to be far greater. It's, they're
if
saying,
you take into consideration people who haven't been found, for example, is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Okay.
People that haven't been found. And how can you, in the middle of a genocide, count the number of deaths accurately? It's just impossible. The Israelis certainly aren't counting, and it's difficult for the Ministry of Health to count. I think in terms of contextualizing this, we really need to understand that this genocide did not start on October 7th. The dispossession of the Palestinian people has been going on since at least 1948 and before 1948. And it is a systematic apartheid, an illegal occupation, and control of vital resources. And in the words of Israeli General Moshe Dayan, we will treat you like dogs. You will continue to live like dogs, and we will see where this process leads. And that has been the guiding sort of the guiding statement of Israel ever since that time. Since Moshe Dayan said that, they have treated the Palestinians like dogs. The Palestinians are not treated like human beings.
Okay, and so I'm just going to bring up some objections that I can hear in my head already from people who are, supporters of Israel, or who are at least Zionists in the most, basic definition of the word, which is we support the state of Israel because Jewish people are living there already, right? So they would say, well, Hamas is not innocent. Hamas has done this and that. It was, with Hamas that the first suicide bombing started, and Hamas has been, in these hospitals and so forth. And so there's a lot of talk about Hamas. But then, does that bleed over into how people are thinking about Palestinians, or do you not care? Suhail.
We are the Palestinian people. We love life. And you never heard any suicide bombing before Israel came in. When Israel came and did what it did to my people were left without hope. So the only thing they have left is to go and do suicide bombing, which I don't agree with it, okay? But when you put a cat in a room, leave it without food and water for a week, that cat become a tiger. They created Israel treatment of the Palestinian, created this situation. But nobody loves life as much as we do. And you see that in our family. We have big families, we live next to each other, we love each other. But unfortunately, this came in 1948. The UN proposition, that's 181, that's the one Israel is using. We were created by the United Nations. The United Nations said, we will divide this land between two states, the Palestinian state and the Jewish state, which become Israel. Well, only the Israel state became, and the Palestinians never had any hopes. So that what drove them to do what they did. Before 1987, there was no Hamas. But Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982. They wanted, the terrorists, the PLO. But now the PLO is the Palestinian authorities. It is their allies. You know, they just give names to anybody they want, the way they want it to be. Mandela of South Africa was a terrorist for over 20 years in jail. But at one day, he came out and he became the best president of South Africa. And now we call him the president of South Africa. For that, we are here in the West, we just give names to people as we like. And how do you want the people to listen to us or to trust us when we have double standards?
Yeah, Sophia.
In point of fact, Nelson Mandela wasn't taken off of the U.S.'s list of designated terrorists until after his presidency in South Africa began. So the categorization of what constitutes, let's say, a liberation movement and what constitutes terrorism is so often subject to the media, which in large parts of the world and historically is an apparatus of empire. We see this constantly in the U.S., for instance, in the Black Lives Matter movement. You see that an unarmed Black child is murdered by the police. I lived in Chicago for 4 years before I moved here. And you see a picture of this child and they, but it's not in like a childlike pose, right? They look frightening. They look older than their years. And then you have like a white man who murders his whole family and it's like him, like with his whole family smiling before this fact. We see this sort of media bias constantly. So this is all rhetoric, right? I think what Sohail is pointing out is this rhetoric is completely arbitrary and it aligns very much with the whatever political stance or whatever way in which a liberation movement is most effectively derailed by those who are opposed to it. And so we saw, let's say like the Great March of Return in Gaza, peaceful Palestinians, I believe in 2019, marching towards it's not legally a border, the fence, a land fence between so-called Israel and Gaza. We saw it was peaceful protests. It lasted for months. And the Israelis still murdered people as they were moving peacefully towards the border between these two places. A border, by the way, that's illegal under international law. So this rhetoric is completely arbitrary, and I agree completely with Ali, which is that we need to think historically and we need to also think comparatively, and that every single liberation movement by people who are historically dispossessed, racialized, displaced, enslaved, and so on and so forth has been accused of being uncivil, of being too violent, of rushing for something that shouldn't happen yet, that needs to wait. And I hate to say it, but the people who right now are making the same allegations about the Palestinian resistance in whatever form that takes, were very likely to have said the exact same thing about the SNCC and student organizers and sit-ins during the 1960s.
We will be right back after this short break. Welcome back. This is Ami Chen Mills, your host for this special production from the Moment of Truth team. Our topic is Palestinian and Muslim voices on Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. I want to get to what we think could realistically happen, like going forward, because there's the past and, there's a lot to say about the past, but there's also what looks like a step forward here. What would be something positive? But before that, I want to also bring up another argument that I've heard about Palestinians, and you write about this, Sophia. You have an article that's been widely read in an online journal called Funambulist. Funambulist. And it's from 2019. It's called Who Will We Be When We Are Free? And it's about Palestinian identity in the diaspora and also still in Gaza or the West Bank or as you would say, Palestine, and what does it mean to be Palestinian when there's been so much suffering and struggle? Is that, it's about identity. And one of the things you mention is that one of the things that Israelis will often say, or the Israeli government, is there is no such thing as a Palestinian. So let's talk about that. Is there such a thing as a Palestinian? What is that? And who gets to define that?
Yes, thank you. The Funambulist is a print magazine also, but it is many of its articles are open access. Yes, I mean, in this article, I was sort of just thinking about what it was to be Palestinian growing up in the diaspora, somewhat removed, right? Somebody who's never been able to visit my homeland. I'm actually able to, legally, but of course it's incredibly difficult for Palestinians and Arabs and anyone who seems like an Arab to get through the Israeli airports. And so in this piece, I was really just thinking about how our identity is sort of forged in this devastation after the Nakba, or the 1948 catastrophe. And of course, the common argument is, there was never a nation of Palestine. And, that's fine. If we want to look at European designation of nation states and modernity, sure, that's likely true. But we do know there were Palestinian people. We know there are Palestinian people because we have a long history of cultural production, of interaction with the rest of the world. One of the hubs of global transit historically and into the present. And to say that there's no such thing as a Palestinian is akin to saying there's no such thing as a Cherokee person, because there was no, let's say, Cherokee nation that would have been recognized by modern United Nations. But that doesn't mean that the Cherokee people don't exist. It means that they were dispossessed from what they understood to be their, what the land that gives them their life. And so what I think about this is, first of all, it's not really a claim that I think needs to be discussed. It's a disingenuous accusation. The state of Israel, the other two places it was discussed as potentially being before 1948 was Argentina and Uganda. So there was clearly not a very long historic link to what became Israel in what is Palestine. But I would just say in response to that it's kind of a question that doesn't really need to be dealt with, because what we're thinking about is, what does it mean to be Palestinian moving forward, since there are millions of us in the diaspora and millions more who have a legally protected right to return under the Geneva Conventions that were themselves adopted after World War II and the Holocaust.
If I may add something, please. If you look in the Bible, all the maps, it says Palestine on them. And if you go back, Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, she showed her passport, the Palestinian passport, before the creation of Israel. I do have at home currency, says Palestine on it. Beside all what my friend talked about, but yet there was physical Palestinian states. We were living under our own countries. We were looking under our government. We had our own passports. We had our own currencies, and we had our own tradition, which they tried to steal it from us. They call it the Israeli salad. They took the Palestinian even salad. They call it Israeli salad now.
What is the Israeli salad?
It is a cucumber and tomatoes with olive oil and lemon.
Yeah, I've had that.
It's really good.
I've been there several times.
Yeah, but also when Abraham came, let's go back 3,000 years ago. According to the Bible, when Abraham came to the land of Canaan, the Palestine there, he bought, according to the Bible, he bought a piece of land for 6 shekel. Who did he buy the land from? From himself? He bought it from Palestinians, the people of the land there. And I know that because I'm from the city of Hebron. And I prayed in that place where Abraham is buried with some of his kids and his wife several times. And that where one of the settlers, the Israeli settlers, came and killed 29 Palestinians on the morning prayer while they're kneeling down praying. And he is a doctor. I don't know what a medical doctor can carry an M16 and shoot 29 people while they were kneeling down and praying in that place, in that holy place. And you calling me terrorist? They are the terrorists. They are the one that's what is happening right now. Nobody really can speak about it. It's so horrible. When you see the bulldozer bulldozing people alive, they are standing there. The bulldozer came, and we saw it all. Israel cannot hide anymore. The internet is here. We see videos coming out of there. We see their crimes. When you attack the Shifa hospital twice, and you say Hamas leadership is there, and they don't find anybody, but they found over 400 people are buried in one tomb. That's with the bulldozer, they bulldoze them. This is what Israel doing. But yet, we here in the West, we give them the green light to do anything. But that's no more. The American people are seeing the truth. The young people in colleges are seeing the truth. And things are changing. And I invite all of the listeners to really look at the truth and take the change, the positive change. Let's be human being. I don't want anything more to ask anybody, but be a human being. Treat us like a human being. And that's all.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that I have a lot of Jewish friends. I have friends in Israel. I know a lot of Orthodox Jewish people who, when October 7th happened, now you can say, there's a whole context there for why that happened and so on and so forth. I mean, it was an attack, and there have been many attacks, right, on all sides here. I could tell that they felt real fear, that they felt this is the biggest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. They've said that.
Not true, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
The largest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust was during the Argentine junta. But because those were left-wing Jews organizing in Argentina, that wasn't commemorated in the same way. So that's actually a false claim, although it is one that we hear quite often.
Yeah. So, okay, and so there's that. But then also there's this real fear, and Suhail, you've talked about anti-Semitism. We're all Semites, actually.
I am Semite.
Yeah, and okay, so let's say there's anti-Jewishness also. So there's all this reaction, right? Which seems to me like post-trauma, and that's not to dismiss Palestinian trauma. So much trauma. Yes, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say something. If we go back to October 7th. At first, they said there were 1,400 Israeli were killed by Hamas. But they came back and changed the number. They said only 1,200. Why? They found out that at least 200 of the party goers were charted. Their body was burned. And Hamas did not have that weapon to kill them. They were killed by Israeli helicopters. And they are attached to us to say that the Palestinian killed them. They talked about kids with their heads are cut off and rapes. None of them was, nobody brought any evidence to show that. But yet our women in the Shifa hospital were raped, and we do have the evidence on that by the Israeli soldiers. But nobody is talking about that.
Sophia?
Yeah, I think really though, it's not really a kind of what Hamas did, what Israel did. The fact is that there's no equivalence. There's no equivalence between the third largest and well-funded military in the world with what it appears to be endless funding from the United States in particular, and dispossessed people, a rabble essentially of people who cast themselves as resistors, known as Hamas or Al-Qassam brigades or whatever. There's no equivalence here. It's something that we really need to, I think, remember that this is part of the rhetoric of dispossession. It's a rhetoric that tricks us. If we say, well, what about Hamas? What about Israel? It means that we're being forced to compare these two entities as though they are equivalent in some capacity. One is a state that has recognition, that has funding, that has ample support, and a military. And one is a purposefully disconnected archipelago of people who are occupied under international law. And it's also really important for us not to forget that there were Jews in Palestine too. There are Palestinian Jews who were also dispossessed in 1948. And we don't talk about them very much because when we want to cast this as a religious conflict, when ignoring the fact that the vast majority of Zionists in the U.S. anyway are Christian evangelicals. But when we cast this as a religious issue, it's a complete derailment from what this actually is, which is a history of colonization, occupation, and dispossession. And all occupied people have the right to resist their occupation.
And would you say that was the intention of Jewish people at that time? Or, I mean, I know some Jewish people, and we'll have them on May 6th to talk about, their feelings of, feeling manipulated by colonial powers as well in the situation.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. And so what do we do if that's the case? What do we do? What do we do now?
I really appreciate that question, Amy, because it's such an important one. We have seen in Germany in the last 6 months, an incredible amount of censorship against German anti-Zionist organizers, the vast majority of whom are Jews. So once again, the state of Germany finds itself arresting Jews en masse for political dissidence. And one of the most common chants that you'll hear at a German protest for Palestine is "Free Palestine from German guilt." The founding of the state of Israel, whether it would have been in Argentina, in Uganda, or where it did end up, which is historic Palestine, was the exportation of European anti-Semitism. And there is no reason that contemporary peoples there should have to bear the brunt of that. And I will include those in the state of Israel who earnestly have a desire to live in an equal, singular Palestinian state.
So you're talking about, and I've read this, that a lot of, the European nations were like, well, if we set up this Israeli state, then we can put all the Jews there. That gets rid of our Jewish problem. And of course, this was one of the worst places, perhaps, to place Jewish people. I mean, Jewish people will say, well, we're in the Bible and you can see this and that. But it looks like both people, to me, go way back in this area. And I think when the country started, it was 10% of the people in 1948, I believe, or before 1948, were Jewish, and 90% were Arab Palestinians, from what I understand.
Yes, and it's also important to note that there's a very rich Arab-Jewish regional history overall. So I wouldn't say it was the worst place. But again, this isn't really about religion. Religion was used as a justification, but in fact, Germany's genocide was the justification for exporting European anti-Semitism. And early European Zionists in the late 19th century, much like African Americans in the late before the end of slavery in the early 19th century, were often bargaining with their very oppressors to be relocated. Be like, okay, you don't want us here, send us somewhere else. This is how the state of Liberia was founded on the African continent. And it kind of turned out the same way, which is that African Americans who founded the Liberian state colonized and exploited the native Liberians who were there in the first place. And so we see this historical pattern. Just because somebody is oppressed does not mean that they cannot also participate in the oppression of others. And that is something we just really need to hold on to. There's no pass that says because our community has faced a genocide that we are not able to perform another genocide. And in fact, we see how easy it is to slip into a rhetorical dance where this has become about religion instead of what it is about, which is colonization.
You are listening to Talk of the Bay on KSQD 90.7, 89.7, and 89.5 on your FM dial. This Talk of the Bay is about Muslim and Palestinian voices on Israel-Gaza-Palestine. Dr. Ali Muhammad, do you want to comment on this? Yeah,
I think a few things run through my mind. It's a little bit of a cliche thing to say, but the Israeli 10/7 is the Palestinian 24/7. 2022 was one of the deadliest years for Palestinians. 2023 was on track to become even more deadly. But because terrorism is racialized, because Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs are made be pigeonholed to be terrorists in our media, in our discourse. We don't see their perspective. We don't humanize them. We don't value their lives. When a Palestinian dies, so what? Who cares? Their blood is cheap as dirt. And we see that today in this is an American genocide. It's not just an Israeli genocide. It's an American genocide. The weapons are from the United States. The funding is from the United States. If we wanted to, we can turn off the tap to Israel, to this genocidal racist state. However, we do not do that. And that is where the moral imperative comes for every city council to speak out, for every American to speak out against what is going on here. It is systematic. It is abusive, and it is dehumanization to the core. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the Middle East actually has a very rich history of coexistence. Anti-Semitism, Western anti-Semitism, is not something that's shared in the history of the Middle East. If you read Bernard Lewis, the Princeton scholar, who is very critical of Islam, his book, The Jews of Islam, he makes this point very clearly, that there's nothing in Islamic history or Muslim history or Arab history to compare with Western anti-Semitism, where Muslim history, tolerance was the norm and persecution was the exception. However, in Western history is very much the opposite. So, it's very disingenuous for people to be framing this as a religious conflict or a religious war. It has nothing to do with religion. And in terms of terrorism, yes, Israel is a terrorist state. It was founded as a terrorist state by Ergun, by Hanaga, it's one of the only states where you have people who are terrorists, including Begin, Shamir, Sharon, Bennett, who then become prime minister. Prime terrorists yesterday, prime ministers today. So, to cast the Palestinians as a terrorist when they have the boot on their neck and they're trying to just breathe. As Sophia said, there is no equivalence between the violence of the occupied and the dispossessed and the violence of the occupier. And we know that from American history, from Nat Turner and the slave revolts, from John Brown, from the violence that these people are celebrated now. What were they looked at that time? They were looked at as terrorists. Nelson Mandela was looked at as a terrorist. These are really freedom fighters. And if Americans were in the same positions that Palestinians were in or are in right now, they would be doing more than what the Palestinians have done. The Palestinians, Hamas, for example, to kind of backtrack, was created in 1988. If Hamas did not exist, another Palestinian resistance organization would exist, because this did not start in 1988. So,
I just need to, just because I'm just hearing in my head this from about these people were terrorists, right? And so when you say that, why? Because they were pushing people out of their land, because they were killing people.
They were literally part of a terrorist organization. Ergun gang was a terrorist organization. Menachem Begin, Albert Einstein wrote a letter to the New York Times condemning Begin as a fascist, saying that we cannot get behind this. And it's so interesting because Begin was a terrorist, and yet Begin said was really, if you read in the Israeli papers, when he met Biden, he was so shocked at his extremist stance, at how extremist Biden was. So that gives you perspective of who we have in the White House now, that a terrorist, a bona fide terrorist like Menachem Begin, would be shocked by how radical Joe Biden is. Really just, puts this in a different perspective.
Suhail?
No, and those people, the Prime Minister of Israel, there were international notices for their arrest. They are terrorists, and that's is known to everybody, especially Begin. But I just really want to bring something in a different perspective. I moved to my house in Palmdale in 1985, and across the street from me, an old lady moved in the same day. And I found that she is a Jewish Polish and with a number on her arm from the concentration camp. And we became, as a human to human being, so close that she called me son and I called her mama, because she did not have a son. She had two daughters. And my kids, would always go spend the night with her. They call her grandma. When I went to Disneyland, I didn't take my mother-in-law. I took her with me to Disneyland. When she came to die now, she had cancer. She asked me, Suhail, I want to die in my home. Please help me out. She said, my daughter, if it's up to my daughter, the young one, she will throw me away somewhere because she was not the best daughter. But the older daughter was very nice. So between her daughter and her grandkids and my family, we took care of her till the last day of her life. Till now, she died over 20 years ago. Till now, we have a very good relationship with her great grandkids. Because we love each other. We are beings.
That's the hope.
If we look at each other as a human being, not I am better than you because I'm stronger. Maybe today you are stronger than me, but things will change. And Israel is not as strong as yesterday, and they're really better. If they want the safety of Israel, the safety of Israelis, they really better look at the reality of the world. Israel now is the most dangerous place for Jews to live in. They wanted it to be a safe haven for them, but they made it the worst place. And I hope the leadership of Israel can think of that, because I am thinking of the Palestinians, I'm thinking of the Jews too, the Israelis, the human being, the friends of ours, the neighbors that we have.
Yeah, I mean, and so I'd like to get to what you think some next steps could be, who should be negotiating with who. I mean, there's so much here, and we only have like 4 minutes left in the program. We could go on for probably a whole nother hour, and maybe at some point we can do this again. I wanted to bring up just the quickly, just a few things, and you could comment on whatever you want, but there's this connection between Black Lives Matter, anti-racism, and what's happening in our universities and with the different protests. And there's a lot of Jewish people, I think, who are shocked and surprised to suddenly be in this position where, at least for them, it's the first time they've thought, are we the oppressors? I mean, I have a Jewish friend that I grew up with who said, it's just so interesting to think about us as an apartheid state. And I could tell she was taking it in. She was trying to take it in, at least. And so there's this sort of, alignment around anti-racist work and pro-Palestinian work. And then there's sort of Jewish maybe antipathy toward that, or feeling a little bit frightened by that. A lot of Jewish people would say, well, I supported Black Lives Matter. I support anti-racist work. So there's pieces missing here. Sophia, do you want to speak to that real quickly? And then maybe, everyone can talk about what they think the next step should be, although we're going to run out of time.
There's a lot to say on that. I will say that the perception of rising anti-Semitism at universities is very questionable, in that the only data we have is collected by the Anti-Defamation League, and they count things like pro-Palestine protests on campus as anti-Semitism, which is deeply problematic because it's criticism of a state and not Jewish people. And often these are led by Jewish students on campuses. For instance, Jews Against White Supremacy at UC Santa Cruz is a really rich anti-Zionist organization on our campus, and they are Jewish students who refuse to allow Israel to speak in their name. But yes, liberation movements on the African continent, in the Caribbean, Latin America, and in the U.S. and Canada have long been affiliated and in solidarity with Palestinian liberation. This goes back decades. It goes back until the 1940s, in fact. And there's just a much longer history there of intra-Black and Palestinian organizing that really supersedes maybe what people's perceptions are of Black Lives Matter in the U.S. There's a sort of historic link that just can't be broken.
Okay, I just need one person to say what needs to happen next, like practically. Dr. Mohammed.
Israel is a racist settler colonial apartheid state. It needs to be treated just like South Africa was treated in the past: divestment, boycotts, sanctions, and it does not have a right to exist. No state has a right to exist. States have obligations, not rights. Free Palestine.
Okay. Amen.
And do you think there's a way to coexist together?
Yeah, one state, treat everybody equal. Away with this Jewish superiority nonsense.
Okay.
Exactly. I don't think the two-state solution will exist anymore. One state. We all have the same voice, we have the same responsibility, and we have the same freedom. And without feeling one side is better than the other one. The supremacy should go.
Yeah.
And look at each other as a human being.
Yeah. We need to talk more about all of this. There's so much to dig into. We have to wrap it up. I want to thank you so much for being in the studio with me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
You've been listening to Talk of the Bay on KSQD, produced by the Moment of Truth team. Our next Moment of Truth program will feature Jewish community members who have been engaged in dialogues with one another, with Zionist and anti-Zionist Jews, and who have been working in collaboration with Palestinians to call for a ceasefire in Israel, Gaza, and Palestine. That happens on May 6th, Holocaust Remembrance Day at 6 p.m. right here on KSQD. Please contact the Moment of Truth team at Amy, AMI, at ksqd.org with questions or comments about our program. Find our new podcast and like, review, subscribe, and comment at Apple, iTunes, and at YouTube. Amy's coaching and education website is at www.amychen.com. Moment of Truth gives many thanks to our team, Nyanko Nyasu, sound and tech engineer, and our research and production team, Nyanko, Mei-Ling Obinata, Todd Zimmerman, and Vara Ramakrishnan. Todd Zimmerman of Nativeverse Studios created the theme song. Kathy Krizik created our logo. Thanks to our KSQD program manager, Howard Feldstein, and the entire amazing KSQD team on the California Central Coast where this show originates. Thank you for tuning in to Moment of Truth. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.